Hi there, and welcome to video 16 of our Flipped History series. This video is on population growth, and there are three learning intentions. The first one is to describe the social and geographic origins of immigrants. The second is to explain the origins and the impact of the Filles du Roi. And the third learning intention is to explain family and immigration policies in New France. The social and geographic origins of immigrants from France to New France in some ways are surprising and in other ways are not. The geographic origins, primarily most of the immigrants, unsurprisingly, came from the west of France, which shows the importance of the Atlantic coast. So it's really of no surprise that many of these people would come from the borders of the Atlantic Ocean, easy to make the journey across to New France. However, most of these people were not peasants from the countryside. Indeed, many came from urban centers like Paris, Saint-Malo, and La Rochelle. In fact, the social composition of many of these immigrants, less than 1/3, or 27%, were peasants. Artisans made up the largest number. They were 45%. The laborers made up 14%. The bourgeoisie, 12%. And finally, the nobility made up only 2% of the immigrants to New France. There were kind of four main categories of immigrants. The first were engagés. These were indentured servants. That means that they signed a contract that gave up many of their rights for a period of 3 years. In return, they received work, some pay, and mostly room and board. Posters were used in these large cities to advertise for these people to come to New France. Many of them worked as laborers, building buildings, farm laborers, domestics, and they also worked in the shops of artisans. The habitants, or the kind of peasant class, the farmers, were another one of these groups. They were often recruited due to family ties of immigrants who had come before. This is known as chain immigration, where immigrants come primarily from one area. Another main group to come was soldiers. We already saw the Carignan-Salieres regiment that arrived in the 1660s to fight the Iroquois. A good number of them stayed behind after their terms of service were up and settled. The other source of soldiers came during the 7 Years' War, at the end of the period of New France, although many of these men did not remain in France. The final group that came were the Filles du Roi, and we'll be looking at them in much greater detail. Jean Talon, the first intendant of New France, undertook a census or account of the population in the early 1660s. He found that of the population of 3,000, only about a third were women. And as a result, if the government wanted the population to increase, they would have to bring more women. The solution was the Filles du Roi. These were girls that were recruited mainly from the Hôpital de la Salpêtrière in Paris, and they were transported to New France to help increase the population. Marie de l'Incarnation wrote in 1665, "The 100 girls whom the king sent this year have just arrived, and almost all of them are already provided for. He will send another 200 next year, and corresponding numbers in future years. He is also sending men to be married. It is astonishing to see how the country grows and multiplies." We have the testimony of one of these women. Her name was Marie-Claude Chamois, and she wrote, "I was chosen to join the women heading for America, and rather than beg for the support of my mother, I preferred to give up my homeland, make a perilous voyage, and arrive in a new world. I remained there in silence, far from my country, without friends or support of any kind, or parents, condemned to perpetual exile." She arrived in Quebec in 1670 and married soon after. She was only 14 years old. It is rumored that many of these women were prostitutes. However, that is only a myth. Pierre Boucher wrote from New France, "It is not true that this type of girl comes here, and those who say so are being contemptuous. If by any chance amongst the girls who come, some have a bad reputation or a bad attitude during their passage, they are returned to France." What most of these women were is that they were poor, and they had the ability to reproduce. As a result, many of these women were married very quickly, and they had families. There was incentives to have large families. Families that had many children received baby bonuses in effect. There were fines for families that didn't marry off children, both boys and girls, at young ages, and single men later on were not able to obtain licenses to work in the fur trade. The overall impact of the Filles du Roi is that the population began to grow over the next 100 years till the end of New France. So from a beginning of a population of around 3,000 in the 1660s, by the end of New France in the 1760s, the population was around 70,000. And many Québécois can claim a descendant to one of these Filles du Roi. Well, thanks for watching. While you finish your notes and complete your summaries, please keep in mind the following essential question: why do people move?